She had the kind of life people envy online: white kitchen, perfect smile, endless vacations. Every post looked like a magazine ad. But the thing about pretending too hard is that truth eventually leaks through the cracks. I wasn't jealous. I just happened to know what her followers didn't. Because while she was busy preaching about financial freedom, I'd seen the late payment notices, the calls she ignored, and the way she smiled too wide when someone asked about her house. I kept quiet back then, but sometimes silence has a way of turning into its own kind of revenge. Stay, you'll want to hear what really happened when that perfect life started to crumble. Before all the chaos and whispers, before her name became something people muttered at brunch tables, she was just Leah, the woman everyone wanted to be. She lived 2 houses down from Marcus and Jordan's place, in a bright blue home with white shutters and a perfect little garden she'd never actually tended herself. To most people, she was the picture of control. She had the kind of Instagram feed that made you think life could really look that effortless: morning coffee on the porch, golden light hitting her face just right, captions about gratitude and manifesting abundance. But the thing about Leah was that her life looked good from far away. The closer you got, the more you realized it wasn't about peace. It was about performance. Marcus had known her since before the filters, before the designer handbags and the constant stream of inspirational content. Back then, Leah worked at a small insurance office and drove a second-hand sedan that made a strange sound every time she turned left. She wasn't unkind, just ambitious, in a way that felt a little sharp at the edges, like she was always reaching for something that wasn't quite hers yet. When she married Tyler, a mortgage broker with a polished smile and a habit of talking like every conversation was a sales pitch, things started to change. Suddenly, she was talking about investments, posting house tours, and sharing affiliate links for the products she swore by. People in the neighborhood followed her online because she was one of them, or at least she used to be. But somewhere between her first dream home reveal and her 10th post about financial independence, the gap between image and reality started to widen. Marcus noticed it first in small ways: a delivery truck coming by more often than usual, the landscaper showing up twice a week even though Leah rarely stepped outside. Then came the late-night arguments, faint through open windows, the kind of muffled fights that end in silence instead of resolution. Still, online, everything looked untouched. Leah kept smiling, kept hosting little gatherings that felt more like photo ops than get-togethers. She'd serve wine in perfect glasses, take a few pictures, and then barely touch her drink. Every corner of her house looked staged, too neat, too arranged, too aware of being watched, but no one said anything. In a neighborhood like theirs, you didn't question perfection. You admired it, even if you secretly doubted it. It was about 6 months after her "How We Paid Off Our Mortgage in 3 Years" video went viral that things began to feel different. Leah's husband stopped waving at the neighbors. Marcus saw him pacing outside one night, talking on the phone with his voice low and tense. Leah, on the other hand, doubled down on appearances. More posts, more smiles, more advice about living debt. She'd talk about freedom while wearing a watch that cost more than Marcus's entire paycheck. It was like watching someone running harder just to stay in place. Marcus worked in construction, the kind of job people didn't brag about but depended on quietly. He'd been doing home repairs in the area for years, and one day, by coincidence, his company was subcontracted for a renovation project. The address looked familiar, but he didn't think much of it until he pulled up and realized it was Leah's house. Her house, the one she'd filmed in dozens of videos, suddenly covered in tarps and dust. The job order said property prep and maintenance, which usually meant one thing: foreclosure prep. He didn't believe it at first. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they were just doing some upgrades. But when he saw the red notice partially tucked behind her mailbox, notice of default, the truth hit quietly, like the thud of a door closing. Marcus didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The story was already unfolding in front of him, even if no one else could see it yet. That afternoon, Leah came home while the crew was working. She wore sunglasses, even though it was cloudy, holding a coffee cup she didn't drink from. For a moment, she froze when she saw the trucks, then smiled like she could charm the reality away. She asked a few polite questions, her voice steady, but her hands shook when she reached for her keys. Marcus nodded at her like any other client, pretending not to know her beyond that. There was a quiet understanding between them, one that neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Later that evening, Marcus scrolled through his phone and saw her latest post. A picture of her front porch, sunlight spilling across the white railing, captioned, "Grateful for the little things." Another step forward. He stared at it for a while, realizing it had been taken just before she saw the crew. It wasn't just a lie. It was a defense mechanism. Maybe she needed people to believe she was fine, so she could believe it too. But the thing about keeping up a perfect story is that it costs more than people think, not just money, but energy, pride, sleep. Marcus had seen plenty of homeowners lose their places before. He'd seen how they smiled until the very end, pretending the house wasn't already gone. But watching it happen to someone who built her entire life around being in control was different. It felt personal somehow, like watching a reflection of every lie people tell to survive. Weeks passed. The renovation finished. The house stayed quiet. No more parties, no more. Then one morning, a moving truck arrived. Leah stood on the porch, hair tied back, wearing a simple hoodie instead of her usual styled outfit. She didn't take pictures this time. She just watched as her boxers disappeared into the truck, one by one. Marcus saw her look at the for sale sign, and then back at the street, like she wanted to memorize it before it became someone else's story. When she finally drove away, no one waved, no one took pictures. But that evening, a new post appeared on her page, a quote about fresh starts and letting go. It got thousands of likes. Just like always, no one knew what really happened. No one, except Marcus, standing in his kitchen, scrolling through her profile, wondering how many other people were just pretending to live perfectly, while barely holding things together. He didn't judge her, not really. In a way, he understood. The world rewards illusion more than truth. Leah just played the game better than most, until the numbers stopped adding up. Asterisk. After Leah moved out, her house sat empty for a few months. The garden grew wild, the shutters faded a little, and that bright blue paint she'd once been so proud of started to peel near the windows. People in the neighborhood stopped mentioning her name out loud, but everyone still looked at the house when they passed. It became a quiet landmark. A reminder of what happens when the story stops matching the truth. Marcus thought that was the end of it. He assumed she'd moved somewhere smaller, maybe started over quietly. But one afternoon, while working at a different site downtown, he saw her again, not in person, but on his phone. Someone had shared one of her new videos, "How I Rebuilt My Life After Losing Everything." The thumbnail showed Leah sitting in a minimalist living room, wearing a soft beige sweater, holding a mug like she always used to. The tone was humble, the lighting warm, her words calm and sincere. Marcus watched a few seconds. She talked about resilience, lessons learned, choosing happiness even when things fall apart. It sounded good, too good, maybe. The kind of message that fits neatly into a motivational post. But then she said something that caught him off guard. "I never blamed anyone. Sometimes you just outgrow the people around you, and they stop supporting your growth." He paused the video right there. It wasn't that her words were cruel, exactly, just slippery, the kind that could mean anything depending on how you wanted to hear them, but something in her tone suggested she was rewriting the story. He didn't expect her to confess the truth online, but the way she framed herself as misunderstood, surrounded by small-minded people, made him feel a quiet, unexpected anger, because the people she was talking about were them, the neighborhood, the same people who'd watched her house sit empty while pretending not to notice. Asterisk. Still, Marcus let it go. People reinvent themselves all the time. Maybe she needed that version of the story to keep moving forward. But a few weeks later, a man named Darius came into the office, a client who needed renovation work for a new home he was buying through Leah's new property consulting company. After Marcus found out she hadn't just moved on, she'd rebranded herself. Her Instagram now had a logo. Her bio read, "Helping others find freedom through real estate and smart living." Asterisk. At first, he almost admired it. She was relentless. But when he looked deeper, things started to feel familiar in the worst way. Her website featured success stories that sounded a little too polished. The photos of clients looked like stock images. And when Darius mentioned her name, there was a flicker in his expression, hesitation, uncertainty, like he didn't fully understand what he'd signed up for. Marcus didn't want to get involved. He had work, bills, his own quiet life, but something about seeing her back in the same loop, selling the same dream she couldn't sustain, unsettled him. He started noticing her name pop up more often. A sponsored ad on his feed, a motivational reel, her face appearing on podcasts about women in business. Every time, she sounded so composed, so convincing. It was almost impressive how easily she wore that calm authority again, like the cracks had never been there. Then one morning, While drinking his coffee, he saw a local news article shared on Facebook. New property consulting firm, under review after client complaints. The photo in the header was blurry, but unmistakably Leah, smiling at an event, microphone in hand. The article mentioned delays, refund disputes, and questionable partnerships. Nothing criminal, just messy. But Marcus knew how fast messy could turn into something worse when money was involved. 2 days later, he got a call from his manager asking if he'd be available for a rush repair job at a downtown office space, same building listed in the article. The job ticket didn't say much, but when he arrived, he immediately recognized the sign on the door, L. Monroe Consulting, Leah's company. He almost walked away. It wasn't his business, and he didn't want to be dragged into whatever fallout she'd created this time. But the crew was already unloading equipment, and professionalism won out. Inside, the office looked half-moved, boxes everywhere, plants dying in corners, a few laptops left on desks. There was a faint smell of coffee and stress. And then she appeared. Leah stepped out from one of the side rooms, still wearing heels, even though the floor was dusty. Her hair was tied up, her eyes tired but focused. For a second, she looked at Marcus like she wasn't sure if she recognized him. Then she smiled, that same calm, practiced smile. "Long time no see," she said softly, as if nothing had ever happened. He nodded, keeping his tone neutral. "Yeah, been a while." She didn't say much after that, just directed the crew politely, thanked everyone, and kept moving boxes herself, even though it was clear she didn't need to. Marcus couldn't help but notice how carefully she carried herself, not like someone embarrassed, but like someone holding on to the last bit of control. When the job was nearly done, a man in a suit came in, her business partner. Judging by the brief exchange, his tone was clipped, impatient. Words like liquidation and settlements floated through the air. Leah didn't argue. She just nodded slowly, like she'd already rehearsed this moment in her head. Marcus watched from the corner, feeling something he didn't expect. Not satisfaction, not pity, just a strange kind of clarity. This was the second time he'd seen her lose everything, and she still looked the same, polished, composed, unwilling to show cracks. But this time, there was no camera, no curated caption, no performance, just her, standing in an empty office with her name still glowing faintly on the glass dot as he packed up his tools. She walked over and thanked him. Her voice was quiet. "You always show up right before things fall apart," she said with a half smile. He didn't know how to respond, so he just said, "Guess that's part of the job." For a moment, she looked like she might say more, but instead she turned away and started pulling down one of the framed quotes from the wall. "You can't fail if you never quit." The glass cracked as it hit the desk edge. She stared at it for a moment, then let out a soft laugh, the kind that sounds like a sigh pretending to be brave. When Marcus left, the sky was turning gray. He didn't look back, but he could picture her standing there, alone in that half-empty space, still holding on to her version of strength. It wasn't revenge, not really. It was just life catching up, slow, quiet, inevitable. In the weeks after the office cleared out, the story spread in quiet ripples. Not gossip exactly, just the kind of small talk that moves through people who think they're only making observations. Leah's company had folded. Some clients were angry, some confused. There were no lawsuits yet, but the tone online was changing. Her posts went from daily to rare, her captions shorter, her smiles smaller. She started sharing old photos instead of new ones. A trick Marcus had seen before. A way of filling silence with nostalgia. He didn't check her page often, but every so often, he'd see her name pop up on his feed. A quote about growth, a reposted article about resilience. There was something hollow in it now, like an echo that had lost its source. Still, he couldn't bring himself to hate her. Maybe because, in some way, he understood how fragile it was to live off an image. How exhausting it must have been to keep pretending everything was fine. Then, one afternoon, about 3 months later, Marcus was working at a small renovation job outside the city, when his foreman told him they'd be doing a last-minute contract for a local shelter project, a pro bono repair, part of a community rebuild program. He didn't think twice about it until he saw the name on the volunteer list, taped to the wall of the site, Leah Monroe. When he arrived, the place looked nothing like her old world. The building was old, paint-chipped, with mismatched furniture, and volunteers wearing worn t-shirts instead of designer blouses. And there she was, kneeling near a wall, paint roller in hand, hair tied up, face bare. For the first time, she looked like herself, not a version meant to be seen. No camera, no angles, just Leah, tired but focused, painting over something broken. She saw Marcus before he could decide whether to say anything. She smiled, the kind of small, genuine smile that didn't ask for validation. "Guess we're working together again," she said. He nodded, keeping it light. "Seems like it." They worked side by side for a while, in silence. She moved slower than he remembered, more careful. At one point, she stopped to stretch her wrist and said quietly, "You probably think I'm the biggest joke in this town." Marcus shook his head. "No, I think you tried to live the way people told you you were supposed to. That's not a crime." She let out a soft laugh, one that didn't hide behind charm this time. "You sound kinder than most." Then, after a pause, "I was angry for a while, not at losing the house or the business, just at realizing how much of me was built on what other people thought of me. It's strange, isn't it? You spend so long trying to look like you have it together, and when it falls apart, you finally start to feel human again." Marcus didn't say much. There wasn't anything profound to add, but later, as the light dimmed and they packed up, he saw her linger in front of one of the walls she'd painted, a soft cream color, uneven in spots. She ran her hand over it like she was testing if it would hold. "It's not perfect," she said, almost to herself, "but it's honest." That night, he found himself thinking about that, about how sometimes the simplest words stay longer than the dramatic ones. Over the next few weeks, Leah kept showing up at the shelter. She wasn't leading anything, just helping, carrying boxes, organizing donations, scrubbing floors. Occasionally, someone would recognize her, whispering her name like a faint memory, but she didn't flinch. She laughed easily, spoke less, and for once, seemed unbothered by being seen doing something unglamorous. One day, the project director asked Marcus to handle the electrical repairs in a back office. When he opened the door, he found Leah already there, sorting through old files. She looked up, smiled, then held up a stack of papers. "They're trying to help some families refinance their mortgages," she said, a trace of irony in her voice. "Funny, right? Guess I'm still close to that world somehow." Marcus leaned against the doorway. "At least this time, it's for something real." She nodded, eyes soft. "Yeah, I like that I don't have to sell anything anymore." There was something different in her, not the hollow determination of before, but a quiet acceptance. It wasn't a grand redemption arc or some cinematic turning point, just a woman who'd finally stopped performing her life long enough to start living it. Months passed, and the shelter project finished. On the last day, there was a small thank you lunch for the volunteers. People laughed, took pictures, shared food. Leah stood in the background, wiping her hands on a paint-stained cloth, smiling at a group of kids chasing each other around the tables. When someone asked to take a group photo, she hesitated for a moment, then stepped into the frame. For the first time, she didn't tilt her head or adjust her pose. She just stood there, tired, content, real. Later, that photo appeared on the shelter's page. No tag, no caption mentioning her name, just a post about ordinary people doing small, good things. And maybe that was what she'd needed all along, to stop being extraordinary. One evening, months later, Marcus was closing up shop when he saw Leah again, walking out of a grocery store, carrying a paper bag instead of her usual designer tote. She looked different, but not diminished, grounded. She saw him, waved, then walked over. They talked for a few minutes, about nothing important, the weather, work, the rising cost of gas. Then she smiled and said, "Hey, you remember when I used to post about my perfect life?" Marcus chuckled. "Kinda hard to forget." She nodded, looking amused but thoughtful. "I still have that account. I don't use it anymore. Sometimes I scroll back, and it feels like watching someone else's movie. Maybe that's a good thing," he said. "Yeah," she agreed. "Maybe it is." As she walked away, Marcus realized something. She didn't owe anyone a downfall or a comeback. She'd just shifted from being someone who wanted to be admired to someone who wanted to exist quietly and truthfully. And maybe that was rarer than success itself. A few weeks later, the house that had once been hers sold again. The new owners painted it white and planted a small vegetable garden where Leah's decorative flowers used to be. It didn't look perfect, but it looked lived in. Sometimes Marcus passed by on his morning walks, catching a glimpse of the new family sitting on the porch, not for photos, just being together. He wondered if Leah ever drove past, and if she'd feel sadness or peace, maybe both, because that's how life usually is, not a clean ending, not a dramatic payoff. just a mix of things that don't quite balance, but still make sense when you step back. There was no revenge, not really, just truth unfolding at its own pace. The kind that doesn't need to be posted or performed, the quiet kind that stays with you long after the story ends.